the quality is not going to be as good as it normally is, which I try to make it pretty good quality. But the audio is going to suck on this one. So I'll do the best I can with it. Anyway, I wanted to do a video that would tackle something I did a video about a few months ago, which was Neil deGrasse Tyson on the Joe Rogan podcast. So I did the video about them talking about quantum mechanics and how Tyson got his explanation of the outcomes of the double slit experiment wrong, essentially. And so it would have been nice if Joe Rogan had watched my video and gotten some of the criticisms from it. And this, I'm not complaining against him or Neil deGrasse Tyson. These are busy people. They don't have time for nobodies like me to watch every video that gets tweeted at them. I think I did tweet it at them. But I don't think Joe Rogan watched it. I'm fairly certain he did not. And if he did, he must have forgotten about it or didn't comprehend it, because he did not ask the question when this came up again in his podcast with the physicist Sean Carroll. Sean Carroll was also posed the exact same question as Neil deGrasse Tyson about the double slit experiment, essentially, where a lot of people use the double slit experiment to say that human beings or conscious beings or whatever observing reality is what kind of makes reality. Almost like reality is like a radio signal, and it requires something picking up that signal for it to be existent, for it to be defined, I guess is a way to say that. So, and I don't think that we can reject that idea out of hand. Maybe that is the case. But it's fair to criticize the people that use quantum mechanics to make that case. You know, they're wrong, essentially, by using quantum mechanics to make that case, and using the double slit experiment to make that case. So it would have been nice if he had watched the video and understood it and understood the problem. Because then he could have asked on this go around, you get another shot. You got another, and he wanted to hear it again, from another physicist. And Carroll sort of seemed to agree that it's the wave particle duality observed in the different aspects of the double slit experiment can be explained by the observer effect. He seemed to agree with that. When Rogan said it, he was like, yeah, that's right. Well, and I'll play the relevant clips here, and then I'll tack the relevant part of my prior video against that was on Tyson to this video, so that once again we'll put the problem out there. But so once again he asked the question, and Sean Carroll seems to agree that it's the observer effect, which is incorrect. The observer effect is when you are attempting to measure something, you're sort of changing that thing by the way that you're measuring it. That's not what's going on here, because Sean Carroll seems to essentially agree that it's because when you put the detector up there, you're changing it. And that's just simply not the case. And we know this because of the delayed quantum choice eraser experiment. So it's not the detector. Now, maybe you could make the case that the delayed quantum choice experiment is affecting the system in some manner that causes the outcomes. But I haven't been able to figure out how that is really the case. So it would have been nice to hear the question posed. Well, then how do you explain the outcome of the delayed quantum choice eraser, Sean? And I would have liked to have heard his response, because I don't know, and I'm not putting forth these ideas that, hey, this shows that our knowledge is affecting reality, or our conscious, that somehow we are just antennas and we're picking up a random signal that sort of defines reality. I don't think we're anywhere near that with these findings, but I would like to hear what the explanation is from somebody that should know. And maybe he does know, but he seemed to get it wrong to me. And all they talked about was just the basic double slit experiment. And they didn't talk about they talked about entanglement and stuff like that. So, I mean, they did touch on things, but I don't think it was really comprehensive enough. And it's not comprehensive enough, or the main reason it's not comprehensive enough is because they didn't talk about the quantum eraser experiment, which sort of makes things a little more complicated. You can't just say, oh, well, we put the detector there and that affected things, and that explains why, and in his mind, he gets the many worlds interpretation. So anyway, I'm going to play the clip from the Rogan podcast, and then I'm going to tack on the relevant part of the previous video I did. And hopefully, maybe this will be exposed to Joe Rogan, because I check out his podcast, and when he has Carroll on again, or when he has another physicist on that would know about this stuff, he can pose the question about the delayed quantum choice eraser.
Jesus. Now you're freaking me out. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about with quantum mechanics that came out of that movie, What the Bleep, that was very confusing to a lot of people, was the whole observer effect. Now that is something that I've tried to explain to people, that the issue is, well, please, if you could explain it. Like, this is, the thing is that people believe that in quantum physics, it's been proven that if you look at things, that you looking at things changes those things. But the way it's been described to me, it's like, no, it's actually because you are measuring those things, and that's what changes it, the act of measuring it.
Yeah.
And that there's some sort of a physical interaction when you're measuring something. That's what's changing the effect. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. This is a legacy of the bad old days of quantum mechanics, when people were a little bit fuzzy about these things. We're beginning to get better at it. The bad old days, yes.
I thought you said like battle rap.
I don't think there were battle days. Maybe. I'd like to see Einstein and Bohr going at it. Rap battle.
The bad old days.
Bad old days,
when people had a more limited understanding of what quantum mechanics really is.
And spoke about it in slightly sloppy ways.
Okay.
So there is the truth that if you want to describe what you see when you look at an electron, what you see is different than what it is. Like you do change it by looking at it. And therefore, back in the bad old days, a lot of people wondered whether there was something special about consciousness or human perception, or something that was helping us explain the laws of quantum mechanics. So as you are pointing toward, no, the answer is no. There's nothing special about quantum mechanics and consciousness in any way. A rock could do the same thing, or a video camera, or a speck of dust. the quantum mechanics rules says that things change when systems interact with each other. The way that you describe a system is different when it's all by itself than when it interacts in some interesting way with some other system. And that system can be a person, but it can be anything else also.
So in that famous experiment that's in that cartoon that gets passed around by people every 2 or 3 years, when they're like, wow, the world's made of magic, and they pass this around, it's usually a yoga teacher. They that shows that there's the particles and the waves. Do you remember the video? See if you can find that video.
Don't. Yeah, no.
See if you can find it. It's Dr. Quantum. Will we get in trouble playing that? Maybe if we're shitting on it, we will.
Yeah,
they get mad at us. We might get pulled. We get pulled from YouTube.
You had a good run.
Well, people, they own these videos, and so it's a real issue is wildlife videos.
Yeah.
Those suckers, they're so quick to pull the trigger, and they have a claim. It's their video.
Yeah,
so if you use
put work into getting it. Yeah.
So if you use it and mock whatever is happening, or even if you tell them, hey, go watch this video, it's on YouTube, here's the name of it.
Right.
You would think that'd be like good advertising, but no, they get
sort
yanked.
Here, I'll bring it up and we can like talk about it a little bit.
Okay, so give me some volume so I can hear what this dude is saying.
I think this is from What
This
the
is the one
Bleep.
you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's
This is from What the
exactly
Bleep,
it.
yeah.
The double slit experiment.
Right.
On the back screen
See.
shows that
Yeah.
intensity. This is similar to the line the marbles make. But when we add the second slit, something different happens. If the top of one wave meets the bottom of another wave, they cancel each other out. So now there is an interference pattern on the back wall. Places where the two tops meet are the highest intensity, the bright lines, and where they cancel, there is nothing. So, when we throw things, that is, matter, through two slits, we get this, two bands of hits. And with waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum.
Okay, now you're gonna freak out.
Okay.
This is where you start getting mad. They're going quantum.
An
Going
electron
quantum, I know.
is a tiny, tiny bit of matter,
Ooh.
like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream.
He's
through
already
one
shaking his
slit.
head, folks.
It's not a tiny marble.
We gotta do a little bit of commentary on it. We can't just play the whole video.
Right.
Okay, I can do I know exactly what they're talking about. It's
Okay.
a very famous experiment. So, so if you have two slits that you let marbles go through, they get two slits in the receiving screen on the other side.
Right.
Whereas if you let a wave go through two slits, you get this interference pattern.
Right.
And so what happens when you let an electron go through? The answer is you get an interference pattern. It's more like a wave than a particle. But the real weird thing that they're going to get to eventually is if you let an electron go through two slits, but you put little detectors on the slits. So you say which slit did the electron go through? Then it always says it goes through one or the other. It never goes through both. And the interference pattern on the other side disappears. You only see the two lines that you would have seen if they were marble-like. So the point is when you're not looking, the electron is acting like a wave. And when you look at it, the electron acts like a particle.
Right.
That is the lesson of the double slit experiment.
Right. Why?
Why? Because when you put that detector on the slits, you interacted with the electron and you localized it, right? There was no such thing as the position of the electron. There was no such thing as the answer to the question, did it go through one slit or the other? There was only a cloud. There was only a wave going through. But you affected it, or whatever the detector was, affected it when it looked through the slits to see, did it go through this one or this one? And that effect changed it from going through both slits to being only going through one.
And how does it affect it like that?
Well, it's what's called quantum entanglement. The detector becomes entangled with the electron. And this is where you get into my favorite version of quantum mechanics, which is the many worlds interpretation. The right way to think about the electron was that cloud, that wave going through. That's the natural thing. The weird thing is that when you look at the different slits, you only see it go through one or the other, and it acts like a particle. So how do you explain that? So in other words, our natural intuitive way of thinking about electrons is as particles, little marbles, and quantum mechanics says, no, it's naturally a wave. The weird thing is when it acts like a particle. And if you're a many worlds person, what the answer you give is the following. When you look to see, did the electron go through one slit or the other, you, or whatever video camera you had or whatever, becomes entangled with the electron. And what that means is that the wave function of the whole universe, the wave function of both the electron but also your camera and you and the stars and galaxies and so forth, splits in two. And there's now one branch of the wave function, which acts like its own separate world, which says the electron went through the left slit, and your camera saw it go through the left slit, and it made a little line on the other side. And there's another branch, which says the electron went through the right slit, and your camera saw it go through the right slit, and it makes a line on the other side. And so they're both still there, but the world split in two, and now you're only in one of them. You don't see the whole world anymore.
You managed to make it more confusing. Congratulations. You screwed my head up even more. I I understand it less now. That's even more baffling.
But the bit you understand is actually true. That's the improvement.
Well, it's so little.
The illusion of understanding doesn't count.
Oh, okay.
One of the ways that we know he's incorrect, and the way that I'm going to say that he's incorrect, is the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment. So I'm going to read a little bit from the paper. We can sort of get a little groundwork here in understanding this paper. So the actual mechanisms that enforce complementarity vary from one experimental situation to another. In the two-slit experiment, the common wisdom is that the position-momentum uncertainty relation makes it impossible to determine which slit the photon or electron passes through without at the same time disturbing the photon or electron enough to destroy the interference pattern. However, it has been proven that under certain circumstances, this common interpretation may not be true. In 1982, Scully and Droll found a way around this position momentum uncertainty obstacle and proposed a quantum eraser to obtain which path or particle-like information without scattering or otherwise introducing large uncontrolled phase factors to disturb the interference. To be sure, the interference pattern disappears when which path information is obtained, but it appears when we erase quantum eraser the which path information. Since 1982, quantum eraser behavior has been reported in several experiments. However, the original scheme has not been fully demonstrated. So that's what they aim to do in their paper and doing these experiments. Okay, so just to very quickly go through this and to try to explain this experiment. This is the experimental setup. This diagram represents what happens in the experiment. So let's run through it real quick. As you can see, there's a laser going through a plate with two slits. We have representations of the different paths with red and blue. So after the beam passes through the slits, the photons are shot one at a time again. So after they pass through a slit, they reach a beam splitter, which splits the photons into two entangled photons. As we can see here, that each photon will have 50% of the energy of the original photon. So these green objects here, BS sub A, BS sub B, and BS, are essentially 50% mirrors. So the photons will have a 50% chance of bouncing off of the mirror or going straight through the mirror. So 50% of the time it bounces off, 50% of the time it goes straight through the mirror. That's very important for this experiment to understand what's going on. So now you can see from, thanks a lot, loud car person. You can see from at detector naught
you can see from the diagram, the red and the blue, that we won't know the witch path information. We won't know which slit the photon went through if it hits detector not. I like just calling it detector not. So the witch path information is unknown in every case. Okay, but keep in mind these are entangled photons. Okay, so moving on to D3 and D4, you can see that if it hits detector 3, we know the witch path information. We know it's the blue path. If it hits detector 4, we know it's the red path. So the witch path information is known when we get a detection at either one of those detectors. So now we move to the really fascinating part of the experiment, and this is the quantum eraser section. So the quantum eraser section, as you can see, this is when the photon passes through the BS sub B or the BS sub A. So what happens, you can see here with the blue path, if it goes, it will reach an actual mirror and bounce off, and if it goes through BS, it'll hit detector 2. So if it then bounces, if it bounces off BS, it will hit detector 1. So you can see that the witch path information is erased. We don't know it, whereas we would have known it if it had bounced off BS sub A. And the same scenario is the case for the red path. We're erasing the witch path information. When it hits these detectors, we no longer know the witch path information. So, detectors 3 and detectors 4, what sort of pattern do you think we will get when we take these measurements? Well, you get a clump pattern. Every single time, you get the clump pattern. Okay? And then what happens when it hits detectors 1 or detectors 2? You get the interference pattern. So this tends to suggest that it's not the act of measuring it that is what's causing these outcomes, but it's just the availability of the information. The very fact that we have access to know the witch path is what appears to be causing this. So you can see that in both of these, in any of these cases, we're detecting, we're measuring, we're using a device to understand something about the particle. But the measurement isn't causing the collapse, just measuring it isn't causing the collapse. It's the fact that we know something about that particle. It can know it. The very act of gaining information is what appears to be causing the quote unquote collapse. So what's even weirder about this, and what I didn't say before about detector not, is it's a little closer. It's closer to the beam splitter than the other detectors. So it's going to receive its information before all the other ones do. So the fascinating thing is that anytime you have a detection at this detector, it's always going to do the same thing as its twin. So if it hits detector 3, it's going to be a clump pattern. If it hits detector 1, it's going to be an interference pattern, and so on and so forth. So what this has puzzled many people, what this means is that information appears to be going backwards in time. So how did the photon know that that its twin was going to be detected at detector 3, for example, and produce a clump pattern, and so therefore it produces a clump pattern. So really weird.